The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Huge news yesterday with the announcement that Democratic Senator Barbara Mikulski of Maryland will support that she will support the Iran nuclear deal. This confirmed that President Obama's White House has the votes it needs to secure passage of the deal. So Barbara Mikulski is the 34th senator who will back President Obama vetoing the Republican dissolution of the deal, if that makes any sense to you. There are majorities of both the Republican-controlled House and Senate that are poised to vote against the agreement. Supporters of this agreement in the Senate now will be able to make President Obama's veto stand. Secretary of State John Kerry said that the administration will continue to try and push support for the deal beyond just these 34 senators. John Kerry saying, quote, 34 votes are obviously enough votes for the president's veto to be upheld, but that is not satisfactory to us. We do want to try to go further. We'll continue to persuade. A bunch of people emailed me, Lewis, sort of implying that I'm probably against this deal because I'm a chicken hawk Zionist shill for Israel. You know, typical sort of anti-Semitic conspiracy talk. Obviously, those people are nuts at face value, but as someone who does not subscribe to the traditional left or right-wing talking points around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I want to be very clear that I am not against this bill. I have some concerns with the bill. The bill says a lot about how Iran will be restricted from getting nuclear weapons. There are some real questions about enforcement, but I really am not worried about that. We know that the intelligence apparatus is going to be in full force. We know that there have been and will continue to be clandestine intelligence sources that will be able to keep tabs on what it is that Iran is doing. No deal is perfect, and I actually think that whether you like or dislike the deal, or in other words, whether you want a diplomatic solution in Iran or a military solution, you should be happy about this deal in either case. Hear me out. If you prefer a diplomatic solution, not a military solution, as I do, then you should like the deal because it puts on paper that the international community has inspection rights to see what Iran is doing. It sets very specific rules for what Iran is and is not allowed to do. And it shows that, in principle, the international community does give Iran permission to enrich uranium to a degree established to be for peaceful purposes. So, Lewis, if you want a diplomatic solution, there's some good stuff in this deal.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. It seems like some reasonable diplomacy.
Now, if you're a chicken hawk who says war with Iran, military action against Iran right now, you should still like this deal. Now, that is not my point of view, but if it's your point of view, you should still like this deal. Right now, it would be very difficult to justify to the international community military action against Iran, war with Iran. So this deal does create a framework which, if violated by Iran, would give a more legitimate pretext for military action. So between what we know about Iran's capabilities now, the reality that the clandestine intelligence operation and apparatus will continue to monitor Iran, we know that there's no real short-term risk to Iran all of a sudden having a nuclear weapon and potentially using it on someone. But this creates a very specific list of parameters, which, if violated, would be more justifiably defensible for going into Iran militarily. It's a win either way.
You could look at it that way, but I think people on either side would still probably find a way to disagree with you. So I guess I'm still kind of a little bit skeptical about this deal. I think this entire discussion would be completely different if we shared a border with Iran.
But which element are you skeptical of is what I'm trying to understand.
When you grant this to a country that is run by a religious extremist, it just kind of makes me shiver.
Well, here's the thing. I don't disagree with you. But what I think is good about this is that because we know that Iran is not going to have a nuclear weapon tomorrow, this deal sort of shows that in spite of this being a country that has this religious regime in charge, we're still willing to grant them some latitude and allow them to say, hey, we're going to comply with the deal. So if you like diplomatic solutions, that's what this purports to be. And if you want a military solution, if they break the parameters of this deal, you now have a stronger basis on which to pursue military action. So I think that no matter what your view is, this is a good starting point. It'll never be perfect, Lewis, but that this is a pretty good starting point.
Yeah, and what I like about this is that it could do wonders for our relationship with Iran in the long term. It could be a positive thing. So, I mean, I guess that is good as well.
Breaking news today that will really anger those who hate Boston sports teams. A judge has vacated the 4-game suspension assigned to New England Patriots Tom Brady over his alleged involvement in the so-called Deflategate scandal. This was a decision reached just minutes ago by U.S. District Judge Richard Berman, who issued his ruling saying that this is not going to stand. Tom Brady's suspension is going to be overturned. His ruling concluded with Brady's 4-game suspension is vacated, effective immediately. Lewis, what's your reaction to this? And since you've been following this, give us a little bit of the background. What was the sort of questionable nature of the case against Brady that led to this being overturned?
Well, it sort of seemed like a witch hunt, and there really was not much evidence when it came to Deflategate. It just, the media went wild, Goodell went wild, and it really did seem like a witch hunt. And I know, believe me, I know how many people hate the Patriots. I know how many people hate Brady and Belichick. But if you like football, then this is a victory for you.
The other thing, Lewis, is the sort of disproportionality also, if you like football, of the suspensions that have been given in the past to players who have done things that are flat out against the law criminally, right? And then a 4-game suspension assigned to Tom Brady for his unclear and possibly non-existent tangential involvement and knowledge of this Deflategate thing. The disproportionality struck me as utterly insane.
It's pretty insane, and we're still taking it on the chin here. I mean, we're still losing a 1st-round draft pick, I believe a 4th-round draft pick. There's still the fine. I guess the fine is negligible, but those draft picks hurt, and this really was just completely out of line. And this is the right decision here. So this is a victory for football fans everywhere, in my opinion.
And Judge Berman identifying, number one, that there was inadequate notice given to Brady of both his potential discipline and the misconduct he was accused of having participated in. Tom Brady was denied the opportunity to examine one of 2 lead investigators, namely NFL Executive Vice President and General Counsel Jeff Pash, and that Tom Brady was also denied equal access to investigative files, including the notes from witness interviews, and that whatever your opinion is colloquially here, that this was carried out incorrectly. The suspension is done, and presumably, Lewis, Tom Brady will be the starting quarterback when the Patriots start their season.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy about that. And I think people probably all over the country are outraged right now, but they really shouldn't be, because the media was completely out of control here, and it was a total witch hunt.
There's a great expose in The Atlantic about the scam that is renting your cable box from your cable provider. Renting cable boxes leads to a ton of profit for cable companies. It's completely unnecessary, and it also takes away the incentive for them to actually give you up-to-date and new technology. And earlier this year, a U.S. Senate study found that American households pay on average $231 a year to rent cable boxes, and that 99% of cable customers are renting their equipment. This gives the cable industry no incentive to innovate, to make better cable boxes. And since you also have a basically monopolistic situation with cable companies as it is, who are you going to switch your business to, Lewis, if you don't like the fact that you've got to rent this crappy cable box?
Yeah, to another crappy company where you have to rent another box.
And to be clear, you don't have to rent your cable box. There is an FCC rule which says that if an individual has an alternative technology solution, that your cable operator may charge you to lease a cable card or tuning adapter, but you cannot be charged any additional service fees for using your own cable-ready box. Few people know about it, and even fewer are actually going out and doing this. And you know what? I fall into this. For me, it's like, it's just easier to rent the cable box, and the cable boxes generally stink. The one I had in Brooklyn with Time Warner Cable was a disaster. The Comcast cable boxes in Massachusetts are marginally better. They freeze all the time. They shut down all the time. You got to call in and have the things reset. And this is a similar situation to what's going on with these leased solar energy systems. A door-to-door salesperson showed up at my dad's house recently with the pitch that they'll put the solar system in, the solar power system in. You don't have to pay for any of the equipment. And if you Google those plans, one of the biggest issues is you're signing like a 20 or 30-year contract to have that company's equipment on the roof of your home, and they are under no obligation to change that equipment so that you have up-to-date solar panels. And of course, in 5 years, in 10 years, we're going to have drastically better solar technology because you have a 20-year contract to lease that particular company's equipment. They have no incentive whatsoever to get you better equipment. And it's a very similar situation to the disincentive that cable companies have because everybody is renting these cable boxes at significant cost for inferior technology.
I think you can probably take this problem and apply it to just about every industry in the country. I mean, so many companies have no incentive to better their products because of rules like this in place all over. It's crazy.
And I know that this is a first world problem, but it is yet another way in which these companies are taking advantage of people and just pulling as much money as they can out and providing an inferior service and inferior product. So number one, be aware that you're under no obligation to use that company's cable box, but the reality is that it's not the most convenient thing to go out and get your own equipment and then lease the cable card from the company. Even if you know you don't have to go with the status quo, it's still a huge pain.
Massive pain, and we need alternatives. We need municipalities setting up their own services, but that's really not happening in too many places.
Let's take a break. I'm on Twitter, twitter.com/dpacman. Producer Lewis is on Twitter at twitter.com/LewisMotomedy. Lewis, how many followers are you up to? Every time we mention it, you get a few more.
I think I'm still under 400 right now.
All right. Well, last time I checked, you were at 230, so that means we're climbing. Follow Lewis, twitter.com/LewisMotomedy.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program depends on the funding of viewers like you to keep growing and expanding and doing all of the great things we have planned for you. Today's new member of the day is Natalie Purcell. Natalie, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. And as I mentioned yesterday, we had 35 half-priced memberships available due to a Indiegogo donor who is currently moving and said, instead of sending me perks, you can use my donations to subsidize some memberships. Of the 35 memberships I told you I had yesterday, 12 are now spoken for, meaning we have 23 left. If you would like a half-price membership, go to davidpakman.com, click on Contact Us, and just email us saying, I'd like one of those half-price memberships. We anticipate they will continue going pretty quickly. Also, a big announcement, one of the most popular member benefits is that Lewis and I do these member town halls every few months where you get to connect with us via a private video conference and everybody asks us questions. We have scheduled the next one, Lewis, for September 15th. I anticipate there will be lots of questions about the Boston move and the upcoming expansion.
Maybe some questions about your hair, maybe some questions about your shirts. All sorts of weird things like that.
Any and all questions we will be accepting. So if you would like to get in on the action with the David Pakman Show Member Town Hall, and of course you get all the other benefits as well, you can get a membership at half price. 23 of these memberships left. davidpakman.com. Click on Contact Us and say, hey, David, I would love one of those half price memberships. I have a really good but also sad documentary to recommend today. It's called Remote Area Medical, and it's a documentary that shows you what goes on at an annual 3-day medical clinic that's organized by Remote Area Medical in Bristol, Tennessee. They do it inside the NASCAR Speedway in Bristol, Tennessee. Bristol is a rural part of Tennessee. It is a poor part of Tennessee. And it is incredible, Lewis. Remote Area Medical started doing these pop-up medical events in foreign countries and in less developed countries. And they realized that much of the U.S., with regard to access to healthcare, is essentially like a developing nation. And they started doing these events within the United States. The movie will be depressing, but I feel that it is also really important to know that this is happening in the United States. If you live in the Northeast or on the West Coast or in the Midwest, in the more urban areas, you may have no idea that there are essentially developing world conditions with regard to access to care in much of the United States. And this is a really good documentary that points it out.
Yes, I just imagine those interviews with the people who go to these medical clinics. It must be just nuts.
Incredible. I mean, it is very much worth watching. I'm talking about the documentary Remote Area Medical. You can see all of my recommendations at davidpakman.com/recommendations. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what's going on with Kentucky County Clerk Kim Davis. I was hoping to report to you the results of her court appearance today, but it is still going on as we are on air today. So we will have that news for you on tomorrow's show. I want to talk to you a little bit about what Bryan Fischer said about Kim Davis near the end of his radio program yesterday on the American Family Association radio channel. Remember, of course, Kim Davis is the Kentucky Rowan County clerk who has been initially refusing just gay marriages after the Supreme Court decision on same-sex marriage bans. Once things blew up, she just stopped doing all marriages whatsoever. She's citing religious beliefs as the reason why she can't do the marriages. She is citing that this is an issue of heaven or hell for her as to an explanation for why she can't do the marriages. And Bryan Fischer had the disgusting and wretched audacity to equate Kim Davis to those who were resisting the Nazi occupation and extermination of Jews during World War II. Let's take a listen to Bryan Fischer.
You know, the thing that occurred to me is, what would we think? I had two examples that occurred to me. I sent out tweets on this score. Two examples occurred to me. What would we think today of a clerk in her position? And this is a clerk that controls entrance in and out of the town of Auschwitz, let's say.
Right.
And there's this boxcar that pulls up, and she knows that there are Jews on this boxcar that are heading to gas chambers, and yet she has to sign a certificate allowing this train to proceed through Auschwitz to get to the destination on the other side of town. Now, the law says you got to do it. That's what the law says. I mean, that's a law, too. I mean, that's a Nazi law. What would we think of her if she said, no, I'm not going to sign that certificate? I think we would regard her today as a hero for honoring her conscience when it came to an important issue.
Absolutely.
Bryan, stop talking about the Holocaust. This woman is a bigot. No one is going to remember Kim Davis like Oscar Schindler, Lewis. I mean, this is just laughably absurd. To Bryan Fischer, a law upheld by the Supreme Court is like genocide committed by a maniacal dictator, right? Jews going to concentration camps is like gay people legally getting married and getting the protections afforded by that institution. This does not compute.
No, every time we talk about one of these Christians that they start making headlines, like the cake bakers or Phil Robertson or whatever, Bryan Fischer always somehow manages to start throwing in Holocaust references and somehow equating whatever is happening to the Holocaust. Why does he always go to that?
It's a popular move just to say, okay, if anything really bad that liberals do is like Hitler, the Nazis, and the Holocaust, anything good that any right-wing Christians do is like those who resisted the Holocaust or Nazis or Adolf Hitler. And as I was listening to this, I was really actually getting kind of sad, because think about Kim Davis. In a few hours, we'll know what ultimately is going to happen based on a court's hearing of her so-called religious objections to signing off on gay marriage certificates in Rowan County, Kentucky. Her biggest accomplishment in life, what she is most known for, is inconveniencing gay couples by making them wait a couple of months to get married or having to drive to another county and go to a different clerk's office. If you don't realize how sad that is, imagine being told that someone in the 20th century is remembered for having refused some interracial couples marriage certificates after interracial marriage was legalized. Oh, wait, no one would ever be remembered for that because it's pure idiocy.
Okay, yeah, but she's looking at this from a completely different angle. I mean,
No, she is, yeah.
Yeah, she probably views herself as a rock star right now, and millions of people across the country feel the exact same way. And so she probably feels incredible about herself.
Well, she is going to cash in. There were like $500,000 waiting for an anti-gay pizzeria. There's going to be way more money waiting, I think, for someone who is actually refusing gay couples the marriage certificates that they are legally entitled to. But it is really sad when your claim to fame is you inconvenienced gay couples, and not indefinitely. All of these couples are eventually going to get married.
Oh, they could even go to a different state and get married if they wanted to. But I applaud them for sticking with it and putting up the good fight.
Pat Robertson last week suggested that turmoil in the stock market that we've been seeing was God's punishment because the government funds Planned Parenthood. He now is saying that the legalization of gay marriage is going to anger God so much that it's going to lead to a continued destabilization of the stock markets and just a huge financial crash. This was part of Pat Robertson's segment defending the anti-gay, bigoted county clerk in Kentucky, Kim Davis. And he went there. He says the financial system of the United States might not survive legalized gay marriage. Here's Pat Robertson.
And this clerk who says, I don't think I ought to sanctify a homosexual marriage, chances are she will either be heavily fined or she will go to jail. And that's just the warm-up and the battle against this particular thing. And God Almighty is looking down on this nation. And folks, I want to tell you, our finances right now are hanging by a thread. The rupture of the entire financial framework of our world is so tenuous right now. And if there was ever a time that we need the grace of God, it is now. And unless something is done to change the courts and to change the way this country's going, it's just a question of time before the fabric ruptures, and we'll all suffer because of it.
I actually think the reality is the exact opposite of what Pat Robertson is saying. Pat Robertson is saying really foolish stuff, and he's bigoted, and this is just nonsense, right? But there is something interesting here to talk about. The opposite is true. If we get into a huge economic depression, why would anyone care if two dudes are getting married? It's a total distraction. And once you have real problems to worry about, why on earth would you care if your two gay neighbors are married?
I think that is a valid question. But as we know, there are some people who only care about this, who only care that that gays are getting married. And I can't put myself in those shoes. I have bigger things to worry about, like what I'm going to have for breakfast.
Well, we talked about why this is in part because the religious right, and in some way the left, by having to react to this nonsense, have made these social issues, abortion, sex education, gay marriage, they have made these issues wedge issues to divide people that should be united about the fact that huge corporations are getting privileges not afforded to the lower and middle classes to avoid taxation and to reap huge rewards off of the commons that are funded by our tax dollars. We have incredible wealth and income inequality. We have a serious problem with the affordability of college. Everybody should care about those issues. But politicians, mostly the religious right, but the left also hasn't done a good job of distancing themselves from these issues because they can't, because a lot of money is being raised around these issues and people are distracted. They're not paying attention to what really matters and should unite us.
Yeah, there are politicians who are intentionally dividing people with these issues, but then there are those who say to themselves, hey, I need to focus on these issues if I want to get elected. And then there are the ones who think that it's important and are dividing people unintentionally because they are sincere about focusing on these issues.
My last thought on God punishing the financial markets because of gay marriage. If God really controlled money and finance, I really doubt he would have allowed Pat Robertson to make so much money off of those blood diamond mines in Africa.
I think if God were controlling the financial markets, yeah, what would the world look like if that were happening? That's a pretty good question.
It would certainly be different than it is, that I can assure you. Let's take a break. After the break, Donald Trump set to sign off on a pledge that he will not run as a third-party candidate. This is not good news. I don't like this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
In completely unsurprising news to a lot of people, new data shows that the states with the strictest gun laws see the fewest gun-related deaths. I told you after the WDBJ shooting of the journalists last week, we were averaging more than one mass shooting per day in 2015. There's a new analysis now looking at the number of gun-related deaths compared to whether states have stricter or more relaxed rules around gun ownerships. And it turns out that the states with the most restrictions on gun users have the lowest rates of gun-related deaths. The states with more relaxed gun laws have much higher death rates from guns. For example, the states with the fewest gun-related deaths per capita, right, so adjusted for population, are Hawaii, Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, and New Jersey, all of which have some of the toughest gun laws in the country. On the other side, the states with the most gun deaths per capita are Alaska, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, and Wyoming, which have some of the most relaxed gun laws. You might also notice something else, Lewis, about the states with the most and fewest gun deaths.
You mean stand your ground laws?
No, I'll get to that, but that the states with the fewest gun deaths are blue states, and the states with the most gun deaths, rather, and the states with the most gun deaths are red states. So now let's talk about stand your ground and duty to retreat, which are two kinds of self-defense laws. In duty to retreat states, a person has to try to flee from a dangerous situation before resorting to deadly force like using a gun, unless you are already in your home or on private property. In stand your ground states, you essentially have total immunity from prosecution if you are using deadly force to defend yourself, whether or not you're at home or in a public setting. So what do we know about gun deaths in these states versus non-stand your ground states? In states that have no stand your ground law, the average rate of gun homicides in 2013 was 1.15 homicides lower per 100,000 people than in states that do have such laws. So, Lewis, in addition to the states with the strictest gun laws having the fewest gun deaths, if we look at states that have stand your ground laws, you also have more gun deaths in states with stand your ground laws.
Yes, and the numbers aren't such a difference here that it could just still be that we're dealing with violent states. I don't think we can say with certitude that having these laws actually increases the number of homicides, right?
No, we can't say that with certitude, but that's more of sort of an ancillary part. The real focus here is that the states with strict gun laws have fewer gun deaths. And if you're going to react, and we always get someone who emails me and they say, David, what about Chicago? Tons of gun crime in spite of strict gun laws. And I live in the middle of nowhere in Utah where anybody can get a gun and we have almost no gun deaths. First of all, you're not adjusting for population when you make those comparisons. And secondly, you're talking about micro statistics. We're looking at the broader trends state by state. It's like me saying, just because Uma Thurman is taller than Jon Stewart doesn't mean that we should assume women are on average taller than men. And this is the reality with regard to the strictness of gun laws and the number of gun-related deaths.
Yeah, the gun supporters are constantly pointing out cities in California and New York and Chicago, of course, the big one. But, it's just dishonest use of statistics.
Republicans are getting even more worked up trying to prevent Donald Trump from running as a third-party candidate. We've talked about why this is a huge deal. Donald Trump, at the Republican debate organized by Facebook and Fox News, did not say, or rather, said he would not take a pledge not to run as a third-party candidate and to support whoever is the eventual Republican nominee. And we've spoken about how if Donald Trump maintains the support he has, or even if he loses half of the support and ends up running as a third-party candidate, he could single-handedly give the election to the Democratic nominee, the eventual Democratic nominee. So Republican National Committee officials have been working with Donald Trump's campaign to try to avoid this scenario. And now, as we speak, Reince Priebus, the chairman of the Republican National Committee, is sort of making a pilgrimage to Trump Tower, coming up from Washington, D.C. to New York City to talk to Donald Trump. And every indication, Lewis, Politico has in fact already reported that Trump is going to sign this pledge saying if he doesn't win the nomination for the Republican Party, he won't run as a third-party candidate and he'll support whoever wins.
And is this a legally binding pledge?
Of course not. Of course not.
No.
This is ludicrous on so many levels. Number one is that by making every Republican sign this, you're saying to Jeb Bush that he has to say, hey, if Trump is the nominee, I'm going to support Donald Trump. In spite of the fact that Jeb Bush has been more and more aggressively talking about how terrible of a candidate Donald Trump is. Number one, that's crazy. Number two, this is completely unenforceable. If Donald Trump is not the nominee and decides to run as a third-party candidate, the Republican Party has no authority or jurisdiction whatsoever to prevent Donald Trump from doing that. Now, do we expect Donald Trump would lie and sign the pledge and ultimately does whatever he wants? I don't know. I guess not. But Trump is the type of guy who might just do this to get everybody off his back and then do whatever the hell he wants. I don't really know. But what I can tell you for sure is that this process is completely undemocratic. And I really hope that Donald Trump ultimately does run as a third-party candidate.
I hope so too. He may want to give the election to Hillary or whoever. If when he loses the Republican primary, I'm assuming he will go back to being a businessman with a lot of money and a lot of influence, and he could have a lot of pull when it comes to the next election.
You know what I read today about Trump, which is interesting. I didn't look at the details, but so Trump is not really the self-made man that some people think he is. He inherited just a ton of money from his dad. And I read something that they did an analysis of Trump's successful businesses and his failed businesses, blah, blah, blah. And compared to what his inheritance would be worth today, had he merely invested it all in index funds and let it ride with the market, that he actually would be even richer if he hadn't done any of these businesses and just sat on the money in index funds and let it ride, which tells us a lot about the power that receiving such a huge inheritance has. He could have done nothing and been more economically, and ended up more wealthy than with all of his so-called successful businesses that he has run.
Yeah, that is interesting. And, we could argue that, hey, you've got an ambitious guy here. At least he tried and, golf clap for that, right?
Yeah, if I had a huge inheritance, I wouldn't just sit around and let it ride. I would take a piece of it and leave it and let it just be in just standard investments, index funds, some bonds, real estate investment trusts, etc. But of course, I would try to get some businesses going or do other stuff. I'm not faulting him for that. We just have to remember that his business success has not exceeded the broader market averages that anybody could get just by throwing their money into the NASDAQ or the Russell or the Dow.
Right. So perhaps he is just not quite the successful businessman that everyone thinks he is. Not necessarily that we thought he was, but he has a lot of support.
All right. We will probably hear very soon, if you have not already heard, that Donald Trump has taken this pledge. I really hope that he goes back on the pledge if indeed he does ultimately take it. We will take a break and we'll be back after the break. Give us a like on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I want to follow up about something I talked to you about on Monday, where we discussed recent GDP growth acceleration, and I used the term artificially low interest rates to refer to the federal funds rate, the overnight rate, the interbank lending rate. And I was emailed by a few viewers an article written by economist Paul Krugman, which suggests otherwise, that the current rates may not be artificially low. And I may have misspoken, so let's talk about it. Paul Krugman wrote a few months ago, "Who says rates are artificially low? What does that even mean?" And he previously explained, "Although I hear the phrase artificially low all the time, I don't think many people who use it have thought through what they mean. What would a non-artificial interest rate be?" And what Krugman says is, if the rate were unnaturally low, as defined by Wixel, that we would be seeing significantly accelerating inflation, and that we are not seeing that. And eventually what Paul Krugman gets to is that rates are historically low, which I did point out on Monday, but he argues that as the economic landscape changes, to say that a historically low rate is artificially low may not take into consideration changes in our economy. And he summarizes it this way. In case you haven't noticed, this is a circular argument. Once you accept the possibility that rates belong where they are or lower to correspond to the Wixelian natural rate, you also conclude that asset prices that are higher might make sense. Once you concede that the asset prices that are higher make sense, you lose the evidence that the rates are all wrong. So it is indeed a sort of circular economic argument. But he brings up a very good point, which is when I said artificially low, that is a more economic argument. What I really should have been focusing on is that the current rate is historically low. That leads many at the Federal Reserve and some economists to suggest that it ultimately needs to be increased. But as Paul Krugman points out, if we are not seeing evidence of a bubble in asset prices, be it stocks or homes or whatever else, if we are not seeing an accelerated inflation rate, then maybe we don't have evidence, Lewis, that the rates need to go up merely because they've been higher in the past.
Yeah, when you say artificially low, that would mean you're implying that it was manipulated in such a way, right?
Well, that's why I think the term artificially is confusing, and maybe I shouldn't have used it, because the federal funds rate is artificial in the sense that humans decide where to set it, right? So in that sense, it's not like you just go out there and you say, well, what's the sort of natural temperature in Massachusetts in September, for example? This is something that is set by humans, but artificial implies that it's not where it would be in terms of an economic equilibrium when evaluating its impact on the broader economy. And I sort of want to walk that back and say, yeah, let's be open to the idea that a historically low rate may actually be the right rate going forward. We don't know.
No, but yeah, that's where it is. So I guess good to clear that up.
All right. I got a flu shot 2 days ago, Lewis. I've been getting it yearly for a while. Oh, you're already concerned. Normally, when I get the flu shot, I have about 36 hours of sort of flu-like symptoms, kind of like I have a cold. My arm gets very sore for 3 to 4 days, and then I'm fine. This year, I'm not really, it wasn't really as bad. I had a couple of hours of headache, and I felt a little bit stuffed up. My arm was only sore for about 36 hours. So I have to say, hopefully this year's flu shot is both more effective than last year's. You might remember last year's flu shot, because of mismatched strains, only reduced your chances of getting the flu by 19%. Hopefully this year's flu shot is both more effective than last year's, in addition to having given me fewer symptoms.
30, even after my most rigorous workout, I am not sore for 36 hours. That's really something. And I don't get flu shots, and I don't think you need them either. You're healthy, you're young, you have a good immune system.
Yeah, the reason I get it is, so let's see, I started getting it when my half-sister was really little, and it was generally advised if you're regularly around someone who's younger than 2, it's advisable to get the flu shot, because if you get the flu and then you give it to them and they can't be vaccinated, then it could be a real problem. So I sort of started that way. And then when I didn't have any sort of significant flu for any of those years, it became a thing where I said, listen, if I can reduce my chances by the 60-ish% that in a good year, the flu shot reduces your chances of getting the flu. If I can reduce my chances of getting the flu by 60%, it's really difficult in the job that I do when I lose my voice or I have to cancel a show because I'm sick and have a fever or whatever. I think it's just worth doing, particularly when now you can get the flu shot with no copay whatsoever. I don't see why I wouldn't get it if I'm reducing my chances of having to spend a week, 10 days off from the show, which would really be, particularly now where we don't have any guest hosts, a real inconvenience.
All right. That is fair. I understand. I'm still not going to do it. And I still can't remember the last time I had the flu. But here's what I'll propose.
Please.
If everyone is getting a flu shot, even people who don't really need it, are we kind of helping influenza to evolve and advance and become immune to these vaccines that we have that happen to have low percentage rates of stopping it? 2
thoughts on that. Number 1, it would be expected that the flu strains are different every year anyway, to some extent, regardless of whether we are achieving herd immunity or not, to the extent that we can with something that's 60% effective. And number 2, no, there's no evidence that I have seen, Lewis, that flu vaccines cause flu strains to become resistant, because you're sort of changing the strain that you're vaccinating against every year anyway, or at least you should be.
Well, I think we would need to hear from an expert on this. I'm still weary about this.
A few anti-vaxxers did email me over the last month saying, hey, David, I watch your show. I know that last year you got a flu shot. It's getting to be that time where people get flu shots again. Do not get the flu shot. It's bad for you. It's just not something you should get. Love the show, though. And it's always funny when I get those emails, because I don't know how, if you're an anti-vaxxer, you could still generally like this show, given that our position on vaccines, which is believing that vaccines are a very beneficial thing to society, I don't understand how you could disagree with that and agree with so much of the other stuff we say, since it is based on the sort of same scientific method that our opinion on vaccination is based on.
Well, I think these are smart people if they still watch the show, because they are able to put that aside and say, hey, I agree with you on these other issues, and that's a wonderful thing. I wish more people were like that.
It is to be commended for sure. I just wish I understood it a little bit better. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is a voicemail from a self-professed Deep South conservative. Take a listen.
Hello, David. This is Will. I'm a Deep South conservative, but I'm extremely upset when you have selfish, willingly ignorant people that do not want to learn the truth or admit the truth. There is no hope for a national solution. And that is what is so scary about most of the Dixiecrat, Tea Party, religious right, and Republicans. Sometime, maybe, folks can learn to work together again. Everybody ought to read the book Advising Consent and see the movie. Love your show.
I don't know if I thought it was Manufacturing Consent, unless you're thinking of a different movie. But yes, Lewis, a Deep South conservative who, while they hold conservative values, recognize that the current slate of Republicans are doing them no service. Great to hear from him.
It's very nice. Yes. I guess you could say a high information Deep South conservative. And, we don't encounter very many of those.
One more quick voicemail for you today. Take a listen to this.
I like your show. I just wanted you to know that I have just as good a pipeline to God as Pat Robertson or any other as far as that goes.
Yeah, I believe that. Yeah, anybody who calls into the show has the same ability to speak to God and hear from God that Pat Robertson does. I don't doubt it for a second. On today's bonus show, fakeababy.com. Lewis will talk to us about that. We will talk about Europe's migrant crisis, and we will talk about a starfish-killing robot. Remember that I have 23, is that right? Yes, 23 of these half-priced memberships remaining. If you would like a half-price membership subsidized by an Indiegogo donor of ours from last month's campaign, go to davidpakman.com, click on Contact Us, and say, David, please, I would like one of those half-price memberships. First come, first serve, 23 of these remaining. Speak to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.